All around him, Daniel Shay saw poor farmers like himself, many of whom he had served with in the Revolutionary War, now being sent to rot in debtors' prisons. Families were left without providers, and mothers were forced to beg in the streets.
He had been taken to court for debts twice by different retailers. So Daniel Shay was afraid that he was going to lose his land, he was going to lose his crops, lose his cows, and so on, and he couldn't support his family at that point.
To lose your farm and to have to work for someone else was more than just an economic decline. It was a decline in your status in your country. That is, you would no longer be a voter. In order to vote in most colonies and in most states, you had to prove that you owned land. This made you an independent man.
And here you have an interesting situation of the complete insensitivity, the blindness of a political elite. The political elite that governed Massachusetts were for the most part centered in eastern Massachusetts. They were oriented towards the sea, towards commerce, towards business. And indeed, there was a wide cultural, economic, and geographic gap between eastern Massachusetts and the western part of the colony.
Shays began to meet frequently with his supporters at Conkey's Tavern, inciting them with talk of self-government and rebellion.
It had been a tradition for decades and decades, maybe centuries, to have demonstrations by the people when they felt that there was some economic inequity or some invasion of people's rights as citizens by people in power. Shay's rebellion, in a sense, comes out of that tradition.
Shays had convinced his fellow farmers that something had to change. During the summer of 1786, all over western Massachusetts, conventions were held to determine a list of demands that were to be delivered to state government leaders in Boston. Because Boston was both the center of industry and also the major port, the state government was largely composed of wealthy lawyers, merchants, and property owners.
The Eastern establishment turned a deaf ear. There were protests. The rebellion that erupts in 1786 and 87 did not come as a great surprise. There had been lots of little bits of evidence and suggestions that the people in the West were unhappy. But the Eastern establishment ignored that, and they went ahead with their program of taxation. That is, taxation to raise the money, to pay the state debt, and to make the necessary contributions to national government. In the meantime, ignoring this rising chorus that was coming up from the more rural areas of Massachusetts.